This is a video project I made as my final presentation for Shelter and Social Justice at Laurier. Going into this trip to El Salvador, I knew I wanted to do this project on something other than the habitat work we were doing. Originally, I was focused on a women empowerment mural Rob had in his introductory slideshow. However, when we got there, we didn't spend enough time in Gethsemane for me to get enough footage for that to be my entire presentation, so I adapted. Sister Peggy and the Centro Art Perla La Paz caught my attention. I loved the idea of art as a form of healing, so I decided to include this as the second theme of my video as well. I soon noticed that I was learning a lot about their history solely from the paintings in the museums we were going to, and soon art as a form of history got added into this video as well. Finally, I was fascinated by just how much art could be seen on their streets, and I started hypothesizing reasons for why that could be, and thus art as a form of restoration and reconstruction was added as the fourth and final theme of this video. At the end of this video, I discuss what I'm taking away from this trip. Hope you enjoy it. When we visited Gethsemane, one of the things that stood out to me the most was their collection of women empowerment murals. The first was a large timeline that took up the entire side of a building. This timeline showed the progress of women empowerment and technology in the town since Gethsemane was built. Next was a mural titled New Masculinity, which portrayed the men as the stay-at-home dads, the cooks, the cleaners, and even portrayed men as being interviewed by a female CEO. It wasn't just Gethsemane that expressed this view, however, as in the last museum that we went to, there was an entire wall that showed some women empowerment quotes throughout history, mostly that came out during the Civil War, and one was one by Maria Teresa and the mothers and relatives of political prisoners disappeared and assassinated of El Salvador, which said, "More than half of the women in El Salvador are single mothers. The fathers have either abandoned their children or have been killed in the war. We have to change the machismo that exists. We don't blame the men personally, we blame the whole system that keeps women down. Men have to learn that women also have rights. Men have to learn that they can help take care of the children and the home." Which is basically what the mural was trying to show. Finally, there was a mural that was depicting the stereotypical masculinity. It was portrayed as aggressive and dominant like an alpha wolf, but also alluring like a Pied Piper. Overall, it seemed to me that it was showing the negativity behind the stereotypical, almost dangerous version of masculinity that we have come to know. This is just my portrayal, though, because I don't know Spanish, so I can't read it to be sure. These murals were so striking to me because they were so progressive. This habitat community that was so apparently less developed than Canada was pushing social boundaries that Canada still struggles to find the courage to push. So it was really interesting to see, and it fit in well with what we learned about women empowerment classes held by the women who held our cooking class and the push for education and sustainable development for those women and their families. This progressive push in gender roles generally came from the Civil War. There was another piece at the museum that said, "Life begins when we are all equal. Popular mobilization against military repression opened the door to questioning all forms of inequality, including gender oppression. Women challenged how society devalued their work, their treatment as sexual or reproductive objects, and the lack of economic opportunities. Towards the end of the Civil War, many women identified the dismantling of patriarchy and sexism as an explicit revolutionary goal. After the peace accords, many women organized with feminist movements to end sexual and gender exploitation." So this progressive push of social boundaries came directly from the war and their ability to have these movements, which is potentially why their push has made it farther than Canada has so far. Okay, so this is Sister Peggy, and she's going to explain to us how she thinks art helps heal people from this country after the Civil War, and she's going to talk about kind of what they do at the Centro de Art Perla La Paz.
Okay, para La Paz. I've been here for about 32 years now, and so I've been part of the healing process. And I never knew I was equipped in any way to do any healing, but I've learned that if we can touch those parts of us that, like memories that come from wartime, if we can touch our memories with tenderness, accept them and try to manage them, we can somehow learn that, yes, even though I still hurt from what has happened to my family, to my home, to my having to move, and some of my family not only have died, they've left to find a better life so they can send money back and help us. I can learn that I can really keep going. And so whatever helps us to move ahead and imagine positively that despite all of what we carry, that's a burden, we can continue, whether it's, I've watched it in people in New York, in New Jersey, who live with a cancer and seem to live more fully as they manage to live even before their death. And so I didn't want the kids to die. I wanted the kids to live into what their future would bring, if that can make any sense. Because this is a center where we have young people who were born into the memories of war and the stories about war. They weren't even alive during the war, but the stories were told to them with such graphic details and loss that they almost kind of didn't know how to move ahead. So we wanted to open up imaginative spaces in them where they could imagine themselves moving ahead, their families moving on. And we thought that art opened up those spaces where we could imagine. We could imagine the talents that were buried inside us. Here, kids never had a chance to discover or uncover because they would never have anything to do but just help out in the house and help out on the farm. Most kids didn't go to school during the war. Most kids only had to go to school to the 3rd grade when I first came, and they weren't forced to go. And then after the war, it was 6th grade, and they're not forced to go. But more and more that's changing because as you go to school and you realize that it does open up worlds and you can get different kinds of jobs and maybe you can find scholarships. Again, the whole thing is how do we open up these imaginative spaces? So what we do here is we offer dance. If you can move differently and feel yourself being graceful and less afraid in front of a group, if you can do yoga to calm yourself, if you can learn karate to realize how strong your body is and how you have to defend it, and also music. Listen to a cello and let the cello get inside you, or piano, or guitar, or sing, or harp, or a big band. Gather trumpets and saxophones. And so we have a big band, we have classical music, but we also have painting and sculpture and all kinds of graphics. So I think we have healed people, and let me say really what I mean by that. People are still sad. People, they still laugh and cry, and laugh really hard, but people have a different self-esteem. That little kids, when they walk home with an instrument or with a painting to put on a cement wall where there are ducks walking in the houses and kind of pooping on the floors and everything, but there's something beautiful that they've created. Or if they play the harp when their baby sister or brother's in a hammock to put them to sleep, there's a sense of I'm adding something. I can add, I can do it, I can bring beauty onto the walls, I can make joy for my little baby brother or sister trying to go to sleep in what's really kind of a noisy house, and because it's so tiny. So I think we're raising self-esteem, especially coming from the United States. Reading what people in the United States read about El Salvador, it's all about gangs. It's all about violence. And yes, we do have problems. We do have gangs. We do have young people who have no hope. So what we're trying to do is lower the number of young people who have no hope. Give them hope that yes, there are options. You don't have to choose the negative way or the violent way. So that's why I stay here. I'm like an old grandmother who just loves to hear kids play and smile and enjoy and accept who they are and want to become even more a contributor to beauty, to justice, and to hope for others.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This is art made by the children that attend this art center / school. They use art here as a form of healing to recuperate from the Civil War and to bring joy to the people's lives and to bring people who sometimes feel like there's no purpose in a torn down country a sense of purpose and importance. They're all really talented. It was quite interesting that they found that art is directly related to these children's self-confidence and that art gave the children the ability to learn that there was more out there. Art gave these children the extra push towards education and showed them that there is more to life than whatever their parents' job is. I found it extremely impactful to know that the Centro has been a safe and expressive place for the children since the Civil War, and I believe it's a beautiful idea to use art to heighten the kids' sense of purpose and give them something pretty to bring home to their potentially rundown houses. It was really interesting to meet the art students because you could see in their faces, especially the 4- and 5-year-old my group worked with on our mural project, just how happy they were to be there and be doing what they're good at. And it was eye-opening to know that school is not mandatory there, and this is a center, so it's not even real school, but they're happy to attend as often as possible nonetheless because of the joy, peace, and new pathways art brings them. This mural is from the Museum and portrays a good portion of El Salvador's history, from historical events to famous figures, so here's a brief clip of Emilio discussing some of it.
Murder. This here is another important person that Feliciano was killed for trying to lead all the peasants. So many of the indigenous population have been stripped from their lands in very dubious ways. Like, for example, leaving notices for them to go to this place to renew their deeds to land, but it was in Spanish. They did not speak Spanish, or people who were in the need of food, and they would prefer to go to the big estate owner, like the lawyer or someone in town, and ask them, can you give me something to eat? And they would say, okay, sign this to give me access to the land, and this will be mine, and then I'll give you a basket of fruit or of corn. So many people lost their lives in that manner. So these over here are just the founding fathers of El Salvador. These here, let's see, I can't remember who this one is, but this one is Ayala, who is one of the most important icons of feminism in El Salvador, because she was, in 1920, she threw herself as presidential candidate before women were eligible to vote. So she was like a very progressive woman. She was mocked by many people for doing that, but she left a big legacy of poetry. This one here is Maximiliano Hernandez Martinez, who you see lots of bodies behind him. He was the army general who, the year before the uprising, took over through a coup El Salvador. So these.
For me, this mural portrays colonization. It is representative of the Spaniards, represented by those in armor and on horseback, coming into El Salvador to pillage and fighting and killing much of the indigenous population in the process. The indigenous population are represented by the tribal people holding the bow and arrows. Please keep in mind that these are my interpretations based on my knowledge of El Salvador's history, which is somewhat limited, and I cannot read the title prompt of the paintings because I cannot speak Spanish, as I mentioned before. So these are distinctly my observations based on what I'm seeing. Moving on to this painting, for me, it could represent quite a few things. It could represent the abuse and exploitation faced by indigenous people. It could be representative of the slavery that once went on in this country, much like it did in the US. It could be representative of the exploitation of the coffee farmers who make 15 cents a day. I think based on the fact that one man appears to be preparing to whip someone, it is probably more indicative of the time of slavery. This painting seems to represent the pain caused by the Civil War. It appears to be two surviving family members mourning their lost loved ones who are in one of the many mass graves that came out of the Civil War due to the military and sometimes the guerrillas shooting whole groups of people indiscriminately in case they were supporters of the other side. The eyes that are all around the painting, to me, represent the lost souls and the people who saw too much in their last moments. Finally, there's a lot going on in this mural. Some of it appears to represent the indigenous ethnic cleansing that went on during colonization and the atrocities that were committed against the El Salvadorian people. It seems to include some scenes of human sacrifice, potentially from the time of the Papil people who worshipped a lot of gods that favored human sacrifice and cannibalism. There's the westernized depiction of the indigenous in animal costumes or as full colorful animals. There's also a scene that seems to represent the forced Christianity that was brought upon them, represented by the cross and the church. I feel the huge group of people outside of the church represents the huge base that Christianity holds in El Salvador today after the time of colonization, when it was no longer acceptable to be indigenous or of any other religion unless you wanted your life to be at risk. These strong Christian ties were seen during our trip in how every habitat and family member mentioned in their goodbye speech that they hope God is good to us. The mural also contains all the political figures that were a big part of the history of El Salvador, especially Romero, who is right in the center of the cluster of important people. It was really fascinating how much of their history they could fit into each of their murals. I think it is important that these aspects of their history are immortalized in paint forever, and that the people can come in and see their history, what their people have been through, where they came from, and tourists can come in and see it too. They can understand the pain this country has seen and understand better why they are the way they are. And I think this immortalization also allows for the Spanish to travel here and be faced with what their country caused. What can forever be seen is definitely less likely to be forgotten. So I think it's really important that this art continues to be made. I think that it's important to go in with some knowledge of their history, though, otherwise the significance and implications of the paintings may go over your head. One thing I found really different about El Salvador is that they seem to have art everywhere. It's not just one mural or some tunnel graffiti that happens to be good. It's full-on paintings on streetlights, on wood planks, on doors, on plant holders, and on rocks. There was the cutest little town that we passed through on the way to the R&R, where almost every surface was painted as a different vibrant picture. I found that art made El Salvador even more beautiful than their luscious green life already made it. The paintings ranged from beautiful things to things that seemed of importance to them. It was really nice to see, and I think it stuck out because it's not really something that you see in Canada. We have the occasional town that has a mural, but that's about it. So it was really nice to see this art contribute to the beauty of the country and remain very not propaganda or promotional in nature too. I think the art was potentially a way of covering up the disintegration of their country due to poverty and the wreckage still left from the war. I think it was also a way to heal from the war by making things pretty, bright, and completely opposite of what people would have seen during the war. I think the paintings may have also boosted the economy if all these paintings were sanctioned, because that would have created a lot of jobs and probably still does, so that the paintings are maintained. But those are just guesses. I don't know if that is actually true. What I'm taking away from this trip and this project is that art can play an integral role in post-war development. It plays a key role in children's self-confidence and feelings of security. It can rebuild a country aesthetically as well as economically. And it can push forward a social movement as well as remind people of where they came from. What we see as a menial hobby back home plays so many roles in the lives of El Salvadorian citizens. I think the most important thing that I'm taking home is that the art aspect of healing is where I would like to participate in the social justice scheme moving forward. Meeting the art students really showed me how a menial art project can bring so much joy to young children. So, though I didn't fall in love with the construction aspect of our trip, I did fall in love with the Centro Art per la Paz. And I hope to one day be able to go back there for a couple weeks or so and lead some free paint nights, much like the ones that are for profit back home that we use for fundraisers and birthday parties, so that I can teach them some of the things that I've learned from attending these paint nights over the years. I think I might also like to help out with the conversational English classes that they hold there, once my Spanish is a little better, so that I can translate for them. This trip really opened my eyes to a whole new side of social justice that I didn't even know existed. But just because I didn't know it existed doesn't mean that I think it's any less important than the parts that I already knew. In fact, I'd argue that it's just as important because it's giving the new generation a sense of security, a sense of peace, a sense of self-confidence and purpose that really helps with their development. Though I know I can't afford to go back to El Salvador anytime soon, I am interested in seeing if youth centers and youth shelters closer to home are conducting any of these sorts of classes that I could help out with. What I'm taking away from this trip is a new social justice path and a better understanding of how my skill set can be an asset moving forward.